broadband policy issues that you are concerned about. We did have a discussion early in the session about doing a policy bill alongside of the funding bill, particularly as it relates. I know people have a lot of concerns about the challenge process. We ended up not landing on something that we were ready to move forward with, so we chose not to move forward this legislative session. Late in the session, or late last week, Senator Coran did introduce a bill, and part of his bill includes that plan that he was talking about. Another part of the bill included some of the stuff relating to Frontier that he was talking about in terms of accountability. And that bill number is Senate File 2622. And that also has some of the language that we were working on behalf of the coalition, but we did not advocate moving it forward. So if you take a look at that bill, you'll see kind of what he's thinking about. And then also late last week, Senator Draheim introduced a bill, Senate File 2739, which removes the word wireline from the definition. That was an issue that we fought all last session with Chair Garofalo. Again, that bill was introduced on Friday, or last Thursday, in conversations with the Senate Ag Committee. They're going to hold hearings potentially on those policy bills sometime down the road. So those bills won't come into play this legislative session. And as the Senate Ag Committee puts together their omnibus funding bill, finished putting it together this afternoon and taking public testimony, we were concerned that some of these pieces might end up as amendments into that in that bill. And we were told there won't be any policy in the Senate bill.
Can you explain what that means, remove water line?
I am not a real articulate explainer of that. Dana, do you want to explain that? Because you know very deeply how that affects things.
I would be my senator. Well, I think first of all, he's trying to prompt a conversation because it's been a number of years since we started the state broadband policy, and the question has always been around what role does fixed wireless and wireless broadband serve in our overall mix of solutions for Minnesota. And when we first started 5-6 years ago, the fixed wireless technology was not necessarily in a place where it was capable of delivering the standards we have set for our state that would support an average household use or would support the use of rural economic development. And so the way the bill was drafted was we measured our progress based on how many people how many homes and businesses in the state have access to a wired-based service. So whether that's DSL or that's fiber or that's cable, and that's how we have measured our progress of coverage to this point. When you see those maps, the primary maps that we use, that's wireline coverage. In that interim, fixed wireless continues to mature. We're hearing more and more anecdotal testimony that it meets some people's needs. But again, there's technical questions about whether or not, when an area is claimed to be served by a fixed wireless, whether or not they're able to serve everyone in that area, and do we have any sort of technical standards where we can assess the reliability of that specific fixed wireless implementation. So those are some of the questions that need to take place before the policy changes at this stage of the game. So as of right now, the law requires us to track, for the purposes of the grant, homes and businesses covered by wireline. That said, it does not prohibit us from funding fixed wireless solutions. I'm going to get into the weeds a little bit, but this is kind of one of those nuanced parts of the policy that will be helpful for you to understand a little bit. I would just add one piece to that. So we can fund fixed wireless, but what we've done, we're also required to only fund things that are scalable to 100 by 100. So in other words, have a longer term horizon of serving the communities that this is going into. So the way we've done that is we've funded fixed wireless where they have been able to deliver that 25/3 service, but we fund either a tower or a fiber backhaul so it can then be expanded and improved upon as those fixed wireless technologies improve. I hope I didn't get too far in the weeds, but it's a good question.
Does this language inhibit, does it current
Well,
plans?
no, what it would do is it affects the mapping. The mapping would potentially show that homes are
That's better than
served.
it really is.
Yes, that's better than it really is. And I will say, we've had conversations with Nathan Zacharias. If you haven't met him, it works with me, and he loves this policy stuff. So he's been diving into it. So he did have a conversation with Senator Draheim yesterday about it, and it was a good conversation. And so I think it's just it's a conversation starter as people look to the future, and as Dana said, technologies are advancing. I'm not worried that it's going to show up in a bill this year and cause problems in terms of a final package.
I can talk about what the impact would be.
Okay.
I will talk about what the impact would be, because right now we don't have a system for testing the reliability of a fixed wireless provider. But if this were to go on, what it would allow is any place that wanted to apply for a grant that had a fixed wireless provider in the areas, the fixed wireless provider would be able to challenge a wireline grant, and we would not be able to fund a wireline project because the fixed wireless provider will claim that they can provide service in their area. So that would be the net impact of that policy change right now. So the idea is we need to talk about what sorts of standards or testing protocol or some way of vetting and verifying those fixed wireless services before we allow them to preempt any other type of service going into these areas.
One quick question. Is there anything in the policy regarding affordability?
There is, we interpret the language in the same way that that it's done at the federal level, which includes affordability in the definition of access. So our laws all talk about access. They don't specifically talk about affordability, but it's done administratively in how we interpret the definition of access. But there is not a good benchmark established that can withstand a test, other than the FCC does an urban comparability rate study every year where they survey service providers in urban areas on what the average costs are for the service. And we use that as the ceiling. Any application that comes in where it's presenting that a service would cost more than that, we won't fund. And we'll actually work with them to encourage them to lower their rate so it falls under that ceiling.
Right. Well, let's hold on a second, because I'm going to have Dana come up and actually, we can do that now. Well, so I wanted to just touch on those items. Just a couple of comments about the impact of the $30 million Senate target, that you understand what that means. And that, where did I have that? I have that impact somewhere. It means a 57% reduction will reduce the number of homes served. It will delay getting broadband to minimum services by at least 1 year if we're at the $30 million level. That's the biggest impact, is a 1 year delay, which translates into less homes being served. I think this afternoon when Commissioner Grove testifies, he will be laying that out more specifically to the committee. And Dana, if you want to add. want to keep our eye on the prize and talk about why it's 70 million is important. Any delays is a delay. All right. Turning to just in your packets, you have your 12 lobbying tips. I see. Yes. So as you go about today, you can use this as a guide. And I see that Representative Dowd is here. Perfect timing to rescue me from not knowing what I'm talking about. Thank you for being here this morning, and he was very helpful last session on the working with the House on the broadband bill. So appreciate you being here this morning.
30 minutes? Just kidding. Welcome, yeah. Welcome to the Capitol, and thank you for coming in and visiting with us about the importance of our rural broadband. That's something that I think is very bipartisan and something that I think many people here at the Capitol support. So I've been a strong advocate for investing dollars into our rural broadband for some time. And I actually think this session, because of the way the budget looks right now, we have a big surplus in the next biennium, the one that we're budgeting for, about $1 billion surplus there. And then in the tails, we have a deficit. What that means is we have a bunch of one-time money that we can spend on one-time things, and broadband fits the bill just perfectly. It's an infrastructure thing that we can take a chunk of one-time money and make a nice investment into our broadband. So I think that fares well for broadband this session. Other things that we could spend one-time money on would be things like road bridge infrastructure, or wastewater, water infrastructure, those sorts of things. So it I think sets you up for probably what should be a good session for broadband this year. I understand, was the governor here?
He was not able to be here.
Oh, okay. I heard that he was coming, and I thought, wow, I've been here 8 years. I never had a governor come to events like this and talk. The previous governor didn't do those sorts of things, so this new one's surprising us here and there. But I think it is something that's broadly supported, and I think stands a good chance of getting some pretty decent funding this year. The budget overall is going to be pretty challenging. The governor's proposing a pretty large amount of tax increases, about $3.4 billion in total, at a time when we've got about $1 billion surplus in the next biennium. What makes this budget challenging is that deficit in the tails. So in the next biennium, we have $1 billion surplus. The following, what we always call the tails, we have a structural deficit. It's not very much. I think it's $19 million or something like that. But the challenge that creates is it doesn't allow you to sink money into an ongoing program funding. Like, for instance, a big increase in the K-12 education funding formula. I think what the governor's proposing, what we've done in the recent years has been a 2% and a 2% increase. That's about a $500 million increase per biennium, but it's permanent. It's ongoing into the future. So if you increase the formula by $500 million, you automatically create a $500 million deficit in the tails. So that's what creates the challenge as we go through this budget cycle. We've got still divided government. The Senate is controlled by Republicans, the House by Democrats, and a Democrat governor. So folks have to work together here to get things accomplished. It still seems like we're at the point in session where people are kind of back in their corners, trying to convince the world why their idea is the best, rather than sitting around a table trying to come up with an idea that everybody can support. It's been a frustration of mine since I've been here that we don't get to that part until the final 2 weeks. And it seems like it's too little and too late at that point. But that's the way this place works. The deadline of having to be done by the 3rd week in May is the only real deadline that forces people to get their work done around here. And the fear of not getting things done finally pushes people to move right at the end and come together. So those are some of the things that I would kind of watch for. On the healthcare front, there's not a real emergency on the healthcare access fund or on the provider tax. The provider tax is a 2% tax that is going away at the end of this biennium. The governor's talking about bringing that back to start to fund the implementation of what he's calling One Care, which is moving towards a government model of healthcare. Obviously, we think that's incredibly expensive and not a wise move. We think people want lower healthcare costs and they want more choice and flexibility in their healthcare, and that's what we're trying to accomplish. On the road and bridge front, the governor's proposing a 20-cent gas tax, probably dead on arrival in the Senate. The last time they increased the gas tax, it was 6 cents, and I think 6 members of the legislature lost their seats over it. So it's a very controversial thing to increase the gas tax around here, and this is a pretty big increase. When you dig into the gas tax, we dedicated statutorily some money from the auto parts sales tax towards roads and bridges. The governor wants to free that money up. That's why he's proposing such a large gas tax increase. So he's going to take the money that we put into roads and bridges in the last 2 years, move that over into the general fund to spend on other things, and then he's going to backfill it with the gas tax. So only about half of the gas tax will actually go to roads and bridges. The other half will go to general fund spending. So it's not what I would say the best, most sustainable idea, but it's what the governor proposed. If we get to a situation at the end of session where the governor negotiates down from his 20 cents, let's say he meets in the middle and he says, okay, let's do a 10-cent gas tax. 0 of the 10-cent gas tax will actually go towards roads and bridges. It'll all go to backfill money that's stolen from roads and bridges to go to the general fund. So just in the really great creative way that we budget and plan around here, that's the kind of behind the scenes as to how this is likely to break down. Senate is saying they're going to hold strong and they won't support a gas tax increase, so folks should be looking at other ideas to bring the budget together at the end. So I could take a question or two if you have them. Go ahead, sir.
The second speaker that has mentioned, we got $1
billion.
Lost in zero.
Yeah.
But a good time to get some broadband money, but I hear tails in the future.
Yeah.
What do you feel is our potential to, I mean, even 70 million doesn't even come close.
Right.
You know, how many years after that to make this up.
Yeah.
But what do you feel is our in the future? To get an amount substantial to keep this going, or we have to think outside the box and try to find another source if we're really serious about, you know, getting this 100% covered.
You know, it's a good question, and I don't know. You know, your experts are probably a better. And you know, this is exactly what you should do. No, I can't give you that really. You know, I think you stand a good chance this year of getting a chunk of change because there's going to be some one-time money that we can't spend on ongoing projects or ongoing programs like K-12 education. So because we have $1 billion, you know, you can do that. And if we spend that $1 billion on an ongoing program, you create a deficit that tails. If we don't do a tax increase, and I think a tax increase is probably pretty unlikely this year. So I'm just trying to give you the realistic. This is what I'm in the cheap seats now. So for me, it's, you know, my advice is worth about a cup of coffee. Right? No, and the coffee's free, so there you go. But I've been around here a while now, and it's funny. When I got here, I was the new kid, and everybody thought, "Oh, how's this going to go?" You know, I was minority leader in my second term and speaker in my third term. Now I'm the seasoned veteran that has been through quite a few budget cycles, and you know, I still want to be helpful at the end. I know how to put a budget together, and I know what it takes to, you know, kind of put the moving parts in place to get it done by the end of session. I still want to be helpful, but you know, we'll see what the majorities in the House and the Senate have in mind. If they can get there on their own, they're welcome to do that. But so certainly want to be helpful if I can. As far as an ongoing funding source or something like that, I can't really advise you on what the best course of action is. It's just tough right now to talk about an ongoing funding source because of that structural deficit in the tails. Nobody has it, right? And you know, I get the reality that you have to compete with all of the other programs in state government, but one of the things I've been telling groups that I talked to this year, this is a really challenging budget cycle. It's more challenging. I was directly involved in the last 4 actually. The 4 budgets ago was really bad because we had a $5 billion deficit. But the last 3, I would take any of those 3 over this one. This one's challenging. And the 2 sides are pretty far apart right now, so that doesn't help the situation. But just to give you, and what I've been telling groups that I speak to this year is, I know you're used to coming to the Capitol and you care about your one slice of the pie, right? And you're kind of trained to do that. And whatever happens with the other slices of the pie, you don't really care about, right? If everybody gets a little increase, okay, whatever, you don't care. If somebody gets a cut or whatever it is. But people very often, not everybody, I see somebody shaking their head, not everybody feels that way, but you shouldn't and you can't. And I'm going to tell you why. DHS, Health and Human Services, is eating the state budget. The governor's proposal this year is a 19% increase in the next biennium. That's his proposal. I think it's on an automatic autopilot of like a 14 or 15 or 16% increase. I mean, it's insane. And that's 40% of the state's budget. And at the rate that it's growing, I mean, would schools love to have a 19% increase? Would broadband love to have a 19% increase? Would roads and bridges love to have a 19% increase? Absolutely, everybody would. But for some reason, DHS gets it. Year in, year out, every time. And the growth in DHS is out of control. We passed, I'll just give you an example of what I'm talking about when I say you can't just worry about your slice of the pie, you've got to worry about everybody's. Because if that slice of the pie is eating yours, there's not going to be any for you. And that's been the problem that has happened to broadband for some time. So look at where the money's going. 5 years ago, we got a report from the Nonpartisan Legislative Auditor's Office, which said that they thought there was at least $200 million worth of waste, fraud, and abuse in our public programs. And so 4 years ago, we passed a bill to do periodic data matching. Sounds complicated, right? Pretty simple. We basically would just take this database and compare it to this database. This database might be how much you told us you make on your income tax return, and this database might be how much you told us you make on your welfare application. And if this one says you made $100,000 and this one says you made $20,000, all we have to do is compare the two, find out that you lied to us, and kick you off of public programs now and forever, right? Disqualify you forever. They think there's $200 million worth of waste just in that one item. We passed that into law 4 years ago, and the Dayton administration never implemented it. They refused to implement it. They refused to even look for the fraud. That's a problem, right? And this isn't me saying it. This is the Nonpartisan Legislative Auditor's Office saying $200 million. You've heard about the CCAP, the child care assistance. They think there's maybe as much as $100 million or more in that. We think there's $500 million in DHS of low-hanging fruit, but nobody will look for it. And so how do we, in good conscience, we're the 4th highest tax state in the nation right now. 4th highest in the nation. Okay? How do we, in good conscience, go back to the taxpayers and say, well, we need more money to operate state government now because, things are getting more expensive. If I can't say to you that I'm already spending the dollars that we collect efficiently and effectively, I don't have the right to go back and ask for more. So we owe it to the taxpayers to make sure that there isn't the fraud. And there's always going to be some level of fraud. You can't probably catch it all. But the low-hanging fruit, we ought to be able to check if somebody told us they make $100,000 on their income tax return and $20,000 on their welfare application, right? That we ought to be able to check. This is state government. This agency should be able to talk to that one. This is low-hanging fruit. So so think about it in this perspective. So the governor's got a 20-cent gas tax. He's going to take $460 million that we put into roads and bridges and put that over into the general fund. What's it going to get spent on in the general fund? It's going to get spent on providing medical assistance to somebody who makes $100,000 a year because they lied to us on their application. Or it's going to get spent on K-12 education or any other thing in the general fund. But it's going to get spent on fraud over at DHS. That's the reality. So we need to find that savings, because would you like to have the $200 million? So would education, so would all the other priorities that we have in state government. But I think, and the reason that the tax stuff is important is because you have to look at we lost $500 million worth of revenue from the November forecast to the February forecast. So in 3 months, we lost $500 million worth of revenue. At a time, by the way, that we have some of the best and highest economic growth in the last 30 years. We have record low unemployment, 30-year lowest unemployment rate. And by the way, the report still says wages are going up. Where did we lose it? We lost it in income taxes. Where did the money go? In a growing, thriving economy, where did the money go? We should have surpluses like all the other states, but we don't. What happened? We taxed it out of the state. The wealthy Minnesotans are starting to move their income to Florida. And when they leave, you can't get them back. And by the way, we don't clock them out at the border and say, okay, this revenue left, we have to reduce our expenses. The expenses stay the same or they grow, right? And then what happens? All of us get left holding the bag. So we've created an unsustainable thing. We want to add. Go ahead.
My name's Mark Erickson. I'm from Sibley County. And I don't disagree with you, but the point of this coalition is if we can invest in broadband, we can take pressure off of education, off of transportation, off of job growth, off of healthcare, because it enables people to participate. So an investment in broadband today will help you meet your goals in all those other areas. And are you saying that a 2-year commitment for funds is an ongoing commitment?
Nope.
So you think we can get a 2-year commitment for funds?
I don't see why not.
Oh,
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
That's good.
And by the way, I'm sold. I agree with you.
If the avenue where the current funding mechanism for broadband goes away because of the tail,
Yeah.
if there is a true border-to-border concept of infrastructure that could be developed, could it be considered an bonding?
I don't know that I'm an expert on that. I think it's bondable, but I guess I don't know. I'd have to check. There's certain requirements on what can be bonded for. I think it is, but I'd have to check on that.
We're not 100% sure.
Okay, yeah. And you know what?
I think it's an avenue we need to explore.
We also, we can get creative around here. We can restructure it so it looks differently and maybe make it qualify for that. As Republicans, we always get accused of not wanting to, borrow money. Well, we want to be fiscally responsible. We also don't want to raise taxes, because I think you can draw a direct correlation now to the loss in revenue that we had from November to February to the fact that we're the 4th highest tax state in the nation. And the reason I can say that pretty confidently is look at the other states that are raising the red flags right now. You've heard New York and their budget deficit problems and how much trouble they're having. It's literally, they're saying it's because we're a high tax state. And that's the reality. So, doubling down and increasing taxes more is only going to exacerbate that problem. It's not going to help it. And we can't lower our taxes enough now to the point to draw those people back, right? I mean, Florida, the income tax is 0, the state income tax. Here it's 9.75, I think it is. So 10% here or 0 in Florida. If you have a multi-million dollar income, and you can keep 10% more of your income to live, 181 days in sunny Florida. I mean, I kind of joke, we can't rely on our weather to keep people here in Minnesota anymore, right? We've got to be competitive. And being competitive in a tax climate or environment is just the same as being competitive in broadband or energy costs, right? If a company's looking at locating in greater Minnesota, they're going to want to make sure that they have low energy costs. They're going to want to make sure they have a high-speed internet access, right? They're going to want to make sure they have a highly educated and skilled workforce, and that workforce has workforce housing and all the other infrastructure things, right? These all fit together, but having a competitive tax climate and environment is part of that. And we've created this problem now. The chickens have come home to roost on Governor Dayton's tax increases, and it's just as clear as day. Yeah.
Who holds the administration accountable? I mean, if
You.
you pass, I thought that was the Senate's job.
Well, go ahead. Finish your question.
I mean, if you passed a law
Yeah.
and they don't, who can enforce it?
You mean on the periodic data matching?
Yes.
They have kind of stonewalled on that, and it was, the IT is difficult. I mean, it's literally just couldn't you have somebody sit at a desk and just print out this database and print out that one and have somebody cross-check them? It's been 4 years. I could have made it through that database, right? We're not talking about that many people, right? I mean, there's a point at which you have to say, okay, you're not trying to implement it, right? There's been a whole lot of excuses on why you can't do it, but literally, come on. I mean, just print out the Excel spreadsheet, print out this Excel spreadsheet, and let's start cross-referencing. A person can do that, right? If you can't get the computer to look
We
at
have
it.
to stop the
I agree. This is and please forgive my passion on this. We get frustrated because I want to invest in broadband. I want to invest in road and bridge infrastructure. Those are things that I strongly believe in. But we don't have the resources to do as much as we want because stuff's getting, a 19% increase. By the way, it's a 19% increase in DHS, which is 40% of our budget. So that in itself is, what's 40% of 19? 8%? That's an 8% increase in general fund spending across the entire budget. I mean, we're talking about huge numbers, right?
One more question over here. One more
Say that, is the majority nursing homes?
Majority of nursing homes.
Some of it is.
Demographics are chasing those dollars year by year.
Some of it is, yeah. Some of it, yeah.
But there's been patiently waiting.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry.
And then we'll wrap up.
I can answer questions all day.
You mentioned people moving to Florida.
Yeah.
People are not going to move to our city because they don't have high-speed internet.
I know it. I agree.
So it's an economic issue.
I agree.
That I think the legislature has to instead change the rhetoric from one-time funding.
Yeah.
This is an ongoing, you have to convince everybody, this is ongoing.
Yeah.
I mean, I heard one time, if we did the whole state, really gonna take $5 billion.
Yeah.
So if you take 14 million that had last time,
Yeah.
it's not worth it.
Right.
You have to take this seriously because people are not going to move to rural areas unless they have
Yeah.
to hire people.
Yeah.
We're working with our developers, our local people. Okay, this is a new development. How are you going to service them with high-speed internet?
Yep.
Because we have 1 gig. We have one development.
You're lucky.
I need to bring it up because we started Southern End
Yeah.
property.
Where are you from, by the way?
North Branch.
Okay.
We're in, he's doing 1 acre lots.
Yeah.
They don't do it.
Yeah.
He said, start at the north, then you can.
You guys have actually done some pretty great things in Chisago County. Some of your townships have started
But
doing.
That's a township. We have defined borders.
Yeah.
We are Chisago County, and Century Lake has told us they don't have any CAF 2 money. We have an unwilling provider.
Yeah.
And we are metro. Most people would think we would have it.
Yeah.
But the easy stuff's been done.
Yeah.
And they don't want to do it.
I know.
So if
100%. Yeah, I agree with you.
So it's got to be more of a concerted effort
Yeah.
in the legislature, more than one-time funding.
Yeah. I agree with you, and I'm not saying I'm advocating for just one-time funding. I'm saying I think that's more realistic because we have a deficit in tails. There's a shortage around here right now this year in this budget cycle of ongoing money because of that structural deficit that's 2 years out in the tails. That just creates a problem for our budgeting. In November, that wasn't there, right? It just cropped up from November to February. So I think one time is more realistic this biennium, but I would support ongoing funding for broadband.
One time is 2 years you're talking.
Yeah, 2 years. It's we budget for a biennium. It's for 2 years. Yeah.
And
So I don't mean 1
that's
year
not-
necessarily.
That's not what we're hearing from other people.
Okay. Yeah. No, I mean we're budgeting for this biennium, which is a 2-year period. If somebody tells you they can't give you 2 years worth of funding, they're wrong. They absolutely can. The deficit doesn't. You don't create or add to the deficit until you budget for that 3rd year, and that's just. Realistically, I'm just trying to give you the lay of the land. That's going to create a problem. But you could get a budget for 2 years in broadband right now without a problem, without impacting that. And I think at the end, they're going to be looking for things to spend one-time money on. Now, there's a trick, and I informed the governor of this. If you do $500 million worth of ongoing spending in this biennium, and you don't spend $500 million, the way our budgeting works is that $500 million of surplus rolls over to the next biennium, and then you can use that to fund the $500 million of ongoing spending from this biennium. So if they do that, it could eat up the money in ongoing programs. But that's not really responsible, because as soon as we start seeing the numbers for what we call the tails of the tails, it's going to create a bigger deficit out there. So I think responsible budgeting this year, I would look for probably a kind of a status quo budget as far as the state budget is concerned. Not any real big tax increases, not any real big drastic increases in spending anywhere, with money invested into one-time areas, roads and bridges, broadband, water infrastructure, those sorts of things.
If you want to grow this state, you need to grow broadband.
I agree.
You truly need to grow broadband.
I don't have broadband at my place, at my house or at my cabin, so I'm sold. I want it too. So, how are you?
I'm good.
Nice to see you.
And it's good to be here.
Yeah.
And I'm glad you're sold. But I just have to tell you the
Sure.
story, which I find really interesting. 16 years in the legislature, and I had no clue. When my husband died,
Yeah.
we had a Wells Fargo loan. And I took it up to them, and when they saw how much I was spending on broadband, they said, I don't think we want to keep your loan. You should be in a place where broadband, so deep rural,
Yeah.
it's so expensive,
Yeah.
you know, and they didn't want to keep my loan. Now, my husband said, I always was a good beggar.
Yeah.
So I started crying, and I said, oh, my husband just died. You can't take my loan away. But I did not realize that banks look at what your expenses are. And when my expenses were so much higher in Pine County than if I just lived in Moose Lake, but I said, we lost all our farms, and these are high-paying jobs with good benefits, and we need them, and it's how we can build the rural area. But that's a real barrier. I thought I'd tell you that because it was such a shock to me.
Yeah. So thank you. And thank you for being here. It's for those of us that are in the legislature, this is kind of like an island about this time during session, and the best thing that we can do is see people from home. So don't take for granted the impact of your being here. Go and talk to your legislators and make sure they understand how important this issue is to you, what it means to your community, and what it means to their constituents. That's the most impactful thing that we as legislators hear from, is our own constituents about how these things impact them. So hopefully we can accomplish some big things on broadband this year with your help. So thank you for being here.
Thank you so much. All right, I found my notes, so I'm gonna give you those notes, or Nathan found my notes and gave them to me. So the impact of the Senate position of $30 million is that, again, as I said before, it will delay the progress by 1 year of meeting the minimum goals, the speed goals for 2022. An estimated 14,500 homes and businesses will go unserved. The agency, I mean, there's an ongoing, it just continues the feast and famine that we've had for broadband. So though the hard numbers are 14,500 homes that will go unserved, and a full delay of 1 year at least of getting the program off the ground. So we heard a lot from our legislative speakers, and we are anticipating that Senator Bach, the Senate Minority Leader, will be here as well. He was coming from somewhere else, so it might not be till 11. I haven't heard that he's not coming, and he will be a nice wrap up, because he's always in the Alliance, the Cable Association, the High Tech Association. Everybody who's in this world generally supports investing in broadband at the $70 million level. There's been a fairly consistent voice. I spoke with Senator Rosen late last week, the week before, while the Senate was still, she's chair of the Senate Finance Committee, so she plays a really strong role in setting the Senate targets and how they put their financing together over there. And she's from Martin County. I'm from Martin County originally, it helps. And I asked her, I said, well, broadband. And she's like, well, we love broadband. She goes, but we won't be doing, we won't be doing 70 million. we'll be doing something less. So I was expecting something less. My hope was that the something less was like 40 or 50 million. But I think the Senate, and you maybe got a little sense of that from Senator Gazelka, maybe more a sense of that from Representative Dowd, even though he's in the minority in the House, because the personality differences are quite stark. Senator Gazelka is very even-tempered and all of that. I think it's truly a philosophical difference about how to go into the next biennium and where we spend money and how it gets spent. And the Senate, it's appeared to all of us who work over here that the Senate is kind of positioning themselves as the people, the only of the, the three parts, two are DFL, one's Republican. It's their job on behalf of everyone to hold the line on all this tax and spend. And so it comes from a position of negotiating. So they'll negotiate up. Last year they said they'd negotiate up, and we ended up at their level. Everybody negotiated down. Now the difference between last year and this year is that we have a governor and a commissioner who are going to fight strongly, and the House who are going to fight strongly for the 70 million. I think we heard that this morning. So I don't think there's anybody opposed per se. I think there's just a little bit of, well, we need to hold the line, and that's good enough. It's a good enough kind of a scenario. And so you have to say, no, it's not. Yeah, Rick.
Are you hearing anything on the federal level? I mean, you kept hearing about.
I bet there are people in this room who are hearing a lot on the federal level. I am just so focused on this building that I don't have a real good interface on the federal level. I'm sure Dana at some point can talk to that. Any other questions on this from me?
Can I make a comment about the cheapness factor here? And Senator Dray was my representative on this event, 1125. I think that this wireless thing is about being cheaper. And what it does is it takes away from the local planning efforts and loads on something that may not be as good as things. And it's very disconcerting, the mindset that fixed wireless is better. So that's just, so we will be confronting that. We have a draft feasibility study in Seward County, and I'm going to send that language to our vendor and say, what does this language do to our project that we're working on? Because there's a mindset out there about fixed wireless, and having had it, which is not reliable depending on how people are on there, and what the weather is, fixed wireless is not the solution. It's a combination thereof. And for someone to come in and say, no, fixed wireless is better, that's a way to think they can save money, and that's just wrong to put that on top of us. So that's not what we told us.
Yeah.
Can we come up with a strategy for that Senate hearing? That seems like that's an important hearing.
So Vince is testifying, and he's got some
Can
good.
we have us stand up or wave our arms or
No,
chant or something?
no. That's not our style, and so I think our style is to we're saying it's not enough, and we're saying why it's not enough, but we have to work from here to the end, and so we're not. I think the most important thing to do is to be in the room, filling the room.
Okay.
And so when Vince testifies, he can wave his arms that today's broadband day and all these people are here. We've been talking to our legislators about why 70 million is important, and this is what it'll do, and this is what it won't do.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah.
But it's really important for me to stick around.
Yeah, it's important to stick around. It's today if you can. Yeah, it'll be great. Nathan, were those voicemails I need to know about?
We can talk about them,
They're not for this morning. Okay. I had two voicemails from Capitol, so I wanted to make sure I wasn't missing somebody who wanted to come and talk.
What was the time in the room?
Huh?
What was the time in the room again?
3 o'clock in 1150 in the Senate office building.
What are you doing to educate the representatives and senators about broadband? Because I think we have one felt that, does the CAF 2
I think that people do, just some understand and some don't. I would say that our Chisago, well, Senator Cran and Representative New do fully understand that that's a huge issue. Neither one of them have service at their homes. Representative Detmer, who I live in Franconia Township, sorry, getting the Chisago weeds here. You know, I don't know that my senator and representative fully understand it as well as they possibly could. The conversations about why it's important have been going on for people like you for all these years. And you have to also remember within the legislative process, there were overviews in the Senate, there were overviews in the House at which the Office of Broadband talks, and they have this great PowerPoint where they talk about the whole program and what it does and doesn't do and what the goals are. So there's a fair amount of education that occurs naturally through the legislative process in those hearings. But again, it's your voices talking to individual members. We talk to a fair number of them but we focus on the committee people. We don't, I mean, obviously there's 101 whatever legislators. We don't personally talk to everyone. That's why you guys are so important. All right. Dana, do you want to take a few minutes? We have built into the schedule some Q&A with Dana at 11, but since Senator Bach isn't quite here yet, we can switch to that. Or if you have other things you want to talk about to the group. And then when Senator Bach comes, we'll have him come up and then we'll close and get on your way. If you guys have appointments that you need to go to, feel free. No one's offended if you get on the late.
Yeah, absolutely happy to answer questions. Also, a little bit, one of the things that came up, I think, in the commissioner's comments was Judy asked a question about the governor's broadband task force, and that was announced on Friday. And I would encourage people in this room to consider applying for positions on that task force. It's going to be competitive. I know they won't be able to select everyone who applies, but we want a really good pool of candidates who understand how important this issue is, and that's obviously who's in this room. And the application process is on the Minnesota Secretary of State's page. I don't know if the application process is open, but I would encourage people to watch for that, and I'm happy the governor is able to appoint 15 members to that body, and they will likely be active in the debate this coming year about policy changes and how it impacts the program. So I think it'll be an important table this year to pay attention to. But I don't have any prepared remarks, so first I would just ask if anyone has any comments.
So, assuming we're going to get some funding, because it appears we will at least have one round of grant applications, what do you foresee as the timelines and any changes to guidelines associated with that?
Good questions. Obviously, we don't have a program yet, so I don't know concretely, but however, obviously our team is preparing and getting ready for another round. The timeline will look relatively similar to the previous round. I know there were some concerns about windows, so we've been about the size of the window for application, but truth be told, people should be working now before it even gets open if they're going to be putting in a competitive grant. So that size of that window we've found does not materially impact the projects that are truly prepared and ready to go. And the other impacts on that schedule are after talking to broadband builders about what they need as far as planning time over the winter to be ready to take full advantage of the construction season. So for those of you who haven't followed along, that typically we have some requirements that we have to do some postings for 30 days after the legislation is enacted, so we have to wait for that period. So we typically will open it early summer, and we typically will close it early fall, like mid to late September is the time frame, is the window. As far as again, the policy hasn't. We are not predicting any policy change. Obviously, if that change, we'll have to adapt. So things will look largely similar. There are some things that we can do administratively. We have administrative latitude. So one of the things that we are considering giving specific recognition to communities who are participating materially in the project proposals. So for instance, the townships or the counties who are actually participating with monetary support will get some favorable consideration in the scoring process. I think the remainder of them are process tweaks. I don't think there's anything significant. I will make sure once we get those things nailed out, we'll send it out to our mailing list so people can, and we'll publish it. We'll make sure Ann gets it on the blog so that people are aware of this as soon as this is happening.
So to follow up with that then, who reviews the applications and what are the timelines for decisions on the applications?
Absolutely. DEED is sort of a grant-making machine, that there are work units, that's what they do, and so there are some well-established grant-making processes and procedures within DEED. Our team typically follows the majority of those, and so it's our internal broadband team, along with a couple of other area experts that kind of are ex officio members of that review team. And then we'll take the criteria that's published on the web and with the application and score all of the incoming applications. Time frame, typically we have tried to shoot for, we will be in the throes of it in October and November with shooting for a late fall, early winter announcement. There are oftentimes other things that go into the exact date that's announced, but typically late fall.
Well, given the several references to our elected officials and people not having a real grasp or understanding of the need or even the function of broadband as we're, presenting it, does your office have, or would you consider presentations out into the community where, like for example, when you're trying to gain the support to collaborate here in the communities, to first educate them? I mean, I talk to people that think, what's the big deal? Well, it is a big deal.
Yeah,
and as Vince said, it's a global discussion. It's not just our rural, urban, or just Minnesota. It's global, and I wonder, is there an outreach through your office?
Absolutely, and as we all know, it's kind of a nerdy subject too, so anybody who doesn't eat, sleep, and breathe it like us might not necessarily connect it with the things that they care about.
As people tell their story, it becomes personal, it's not nerdy.
Exactly, and so that, making those connections, we understand how important that is. Yes, both our office, we go out to communities when invited. The Blandon Foundation also has people that they will also come out and talk to your communities. Also know that I spend a lot of time at the Association of Minnesota Counties meetings, the League of Minnesota Cities annual meetings, and the townships. And so we'll speak with those elected officials every chance I get to at that level.
Great.
Should we, or maybe I say can we, talk about the incumbents and the damage that their special privileges cause for development in areas?
I can answer technical questions in the seat that I sit in right now.
Oh, let me ask you somebody else. Yeah, let me ask you somebody else. I'll ask you. Can we or should we talk about the damage that the incumbent special privileges cause?
From my perspective, I think we should continue to talk about why we need $70 million. If we get into a policy issue like that, that's what the senator or representative will remember, and they'll forget about the $70 million. I think that we had looked at the challenge grant process because of that incumbent. We all know about Frontier and others, but until Janet's team can get through the next phase and actually identify that those challenges have been bad, we know anecdotally that they're harmful, but we want to be able to do more than anecdotally, and then we can actually make changes and have a story, a real story, not just an anecdotal story, to say this is why we need to make changes to the challenge program, which is what we're having conversations about probably for next session. Good. And sorry, not the answer you want.
Sometimes I go too far.
We're all passionate about the issue, we all are.
And Judy, I would just add, I spoke to at least 2 legislators as they were leaving who expressed strong interest in holding an informational hearing on those specific issues, either during later or during the interim. So I think there's some stronger appetite than there's ever been before in those public conversations about those issues.
Isn't that the other reason why the DEED has launched the test? So that way you can get a better handle on where the speeds are and if companies are or organizations performing like they say they are?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, for those who may have been following, the DEED had launched several months ago, checkspeedminnesota.com, and it's like the initial first step about trying to gather some broad evidence that starts to point to areas where we may have problems, where the data that we're collecting on this side might not agree with the data that we're collecting on this side. I speak cautiously because anyone who has a technical background understands that the challenge of getting speed test results that stand up to technical challenge is very difficult unless you're standing in the home with the person and controlling all the environmental variables. So it will be some suggestive data that will allow us to dig into areas where it flags problems.
Is there, I forget if you did research or there's just anecdotal evidence from potential demand that there would have been last year if the funding would have come through, and is that anything that we should talk about, in that there would have been X dollars asked for in grants last year, and we would have built 10,000 more homes last year if we could have gotten this through?
That's a good question, and we didn't do it quite that way. I think it was we were focusing on talking to NTA and cable and the others who have been participating in the program to get a handle on. We had to answer the question about how realistic is it for us to be able to deploy $70 million over the biennium, and trying to get a handle on how many high-quality projects there were in development and identified it in the pipeline. And so, while I don't have any specific numbers, I do have anecdotal information from conversations with all of those associations that there is more than that amount of projects already in the pipeline, in development, ready to go. So we feel confident from the people we've talked to, who we know do a good job of executing projects, that there will be plenty of high-quality applications at the level of funding that you all are advocating for.
So other than the goals of bandwidth goals, are there latency goals, like goals?
There are not right now. And again, part of the governor's executive order for the new round of task force is asking that task force to revisit those goals. And I would expect that those types of conversations will be part of whether or not Minnesota wants to get more refined in their goals as far as see and some of the other things that you bring up. So they are not codified into law at this point. We are gathering a little bit of data through our speed test, but again, that's sort of like we're sticking our toe in the water at this stage of the game.
So like I think the latency thing is the biggest argument against the wireless.
Right, and that's the biggest thing that we hear with satellite, particularly. Well, we also hear from people who would say satellite meets their needs, so I have to be very careful about that piece. However, the satellite users we hear from, latency is one of the big problems, variability with weather are some of the other things. So dependability and reliability is something that many have concerns about.
I don't want to take away from the urgency of what we need to do today, but I believe that there needs to be a strategy conversation about working with the federal government on this side. Will the task force, will that be part of the task force charge as what the state of Minnesota can do to improve the delivery of federal dollars and effectiveness of federal dollars?
I guess twofold question. It certainly could be part of the task force. One of the things, once some leadership is identified in that task force, members or even people who are interested will want to reach out to that leadership to express that as a priority, that they talk about it. But no, we work on that on a daily basis. When I was talking about the idea of our grants review team, for instance, that we have internal, we also have some external partners that are part of the federal system that helps so that we coordinate as best as possible under current conditions with our federal partners to talk about how our programs can complement each other. We also talk about the CAF2 with the CAF2 recipients and the ACAM recipients, which for those of you who don't know, those are the federal subsidy or support dollars that go to help provision service into the very rural areas of the state. It's called the Universal Service Fund, and those dollars come, but they have come with much lower technical requirements than we have set here in Minnesota. So what we've done is we've talked with them about how can we pair state and federal dollars to amplify your results so that you can build them to the standards we have using some federal dollars and some state dollars. We do that on a daily basis.
This is a radical policy. I'm even implying now that we need to get the Fed to change those rules at their level to get us the opportunity to get to dark fiber or access issues, and we need to change the rules at the federal level to make those things work for the dollars that we're trying to spend at our level. Yeah,
absolutely. And then the obvious answer is the first touch points there are Senator Smith and Klobuchar as being two of the primary. Emmer has also expressed a lot of interest in this territory, in this area. So that would be your first steps and first conversations there. Our first priority is to execute and implement Minnesota law. We maintain good working relationships with them all the time, but from my seat, I can't be in. That would be a good conversation to have. That's not their first charge. Their first charge is to produce recommendations for the governor and the state legislature. But it certainly would be under the purview of whoever leads that to broaden the scope to include federal recommendations in so much as how they interact with state policy and achieving our state goals. Yes.
Is the coalition working with the USDA? They have a pass-through for infrastructure to cooperatives because the CAF2 money goes to homes, but if you're going to try and service rural areas, the best way is in your electric lines because everybody has electricity. So are you working with the co-op yet?
We have already funded some co-op broadband projects. I am talking to a number that are in the research and development stage, so we are working directly with them. And when I mentioned earlier about the federal people that we are working very closely with, they are USDA people. And so those are exactly the conversations we are having, so they are happening.
We have one that's probably like
So, and we want to talk, we kind of want to get the lay of the land and who's working, who cares about this, and where can we be supportive. So if there's someone who hasn't come and talked to us, please let them know. And for those of you, another point of coordination is, for those of you who are tracking this, there is a current opportunity out there with the USDA Reconnect program. It's a grant and grant loan program, and we are trying to support any applications that might come from Minnesota. They will need a letter from the governor that talks about some of the things our state has in place that gets them an extra number of points on their application. So we want to hear about anyone who's working on those applications now so we can support them. Anything else? Becky, back to you.
Back to me. Oh dear.
Thank you again for your efforts on this.
Yes, thank you very much.
An unserved area. I get to this very, very directly, so I understand why this is important. Thank you all for being here, because to be frank, they don't listen to me as much as they listen to you when you show up in their office. You're who they really want to talk to.
All right, well, thank you, Dana. I think I reached out to Senator Bach's office. I haven't heard back, no or yes. And I got a busy signal when I called, I texted. So I am not 100% optimistic that he's still gonna pop in. He was off-site this morning, and so we'll wrap this up formally. If he should pop in and we're all still visiting with each other, we'll sit down in our chairs and listen to him. But I just want to say on behalf of the coalition, thank you all so much for being here. It really adds so much value to our work, and I wish it wasn't such a busy day because we had a fair number of our lobbying team who work with us on this issue. They're all dispersed throughout the Capitol this morning, and it'd be someone to forward them to you. I think or through Bill, talk to Bill. And because I know some of you you might not get our emails right away. There might be a little bit of a delay. So do that. The other thing that maybe I'll talk to Heidi, I've talked to Dan Larson about a little bit, the communications committee, is that during the Easter break is basically April 12th through the 22nd. Legislators will be doing coffee with me or town halls or those kinds of things. If your legislator is good. And the other thing to look for is that we would like you to send letters to the editor. We all know from the small towns that we live in that they sometimes publish virtually every single letter to the editor. And legislators still read those faithfully. They want to see what people are saying, even though it's a different world out there in print papers. But they still read it, so that's a value as well. And so we'll look for that. There'll maybe be an email with a sample letter to the editor coming your way. And so those voices, and even I was talking to the Candy Ojai folks over here, if you want to write a longer piece, like a 350 or 400 word story about why this is important, and submit it to your regional paper. If you live in a community that is served, like say by Wilmer or Rochester, or even Martin County, the Fairmont Sentinel, or the Elberly, there's regional papers that are a little bigger that will print larger, longer pieces. Those are also opportunities because legislators again read that, and that helps keep our message out into the media. And Vince has an announcement or something he'd like to add, so come on up.
Sure. So I just wanted to mention that we're happy today to be hosting some folks from the Pew Charitable Trust that are here doing some research on statewide broadband programs. And so Anna and Dan, if you want to just stand up for a second. So if you have a chance, visit with these folks. They're interviewing certain people about our program and how it relates to other programs, and they're kind of putting together this research report then that other states might be able to look at. I will say that in my conversations with them, they have pointed out that many other states look at Minnesota's model, and they may tweak it a little bit based on their regional or state needs, but definitely we have a model that we can be proud of here. And thank you, Dana, for all you do to make that a successful model, but at the same time, our model doesn't do us any good if we don't get the funding to do that. We know that, but anyhow, talk to those folks, let them know your insights or how you think this model is working for you in your geographic areas. I'm sure they'd love to hear from you. So, all right, thank you.
All right, well, thank you all again very much, and I would just like to recognize that Cliff Olstead has arrived from County Bank. He's
Co-Bank.
Co-Bank. He's not, County Bank's an old banker. Sorry. Co-Bank, we appreciate your support, and thank you so much for being here with us today. We are going to, recess or adjourn or whatever term you want to give it here. There'll be box lunches in this room in about noon. The House and Senate are in floor session at noon, so if there are legislators that you wanted to meet with and you were not able to get on their schedule, you can send a note in and pull them off the House or Senate floor and have a short conversation with them. And then at around 2 o'clock, I think, if you want to get some coffee and some cookies before you head on over to that Senate hearing, there'll be coffee and cookies back in this room. And we have this room until 4-ish, Nathan? 4 o'clock. So do come and get your jackets and personal items by 4 o'clock. And actually don't leave any valuables here. I don't know if we'll have someone here all day or not. But. All right, and so we're floating around and